Morning. So today I'm going to tell you about it's a true crime one with a something in this that is just mind-boggling, and it's something that is still around today, and it's just awful. So I'm going to tell you the true crime story, and then you'll find out the reason why this is such a perplexing case.
Do you need any trigger warnings or?
It's a story of murder, so there's going to be
Okay.
some
And
horror and some gore and
I'm sl
sad.
I'm slightly familiar with this story, I think, and it's related. If I remember rightly, it's got homophobic terms or
There's some
tones
home
rather.
Yeah, there's some homophobic slurs, but I'll trigger
Oh,
warning them
hideous.
before I get to that. So the case I'm bringing you today is the horrific murder of Matthew Shepard, and it's
Mm.
quite famous, so I'm sure people out there will have heard of it. Um, so we're going to go back to October 7th, 1998. 19-year-old Aaron Crafels is a university student in Laramie, Wyoming. He's out for a bike ride, just aimlessly riding his bike around, when he hits something in the dirt that makes his bike flip and he falls off his bike. So as he gets up off the ground, he's sort of dusting himself off and he's looking around in confusion. He's sort of like trying to look for the item that he's hit that's made him fall off his bike. And as he's looking around, he spots something in the distance tied to a post. It's not a post that sort of like a straight up and down post that you would kind of first envision. It's more like an X. So the post is an X, and then it has a long beam running horizontally across it onto the next one. So he sees something in the distance tied to that. Because it's October, he thinks that he's stumbled upon this terrifying Halloween decoration. He said it looked like just this awful, really scary scarecrow. He said the thing looked terrifying, so he was really intrigued by it. He's like, gosh, that's awful. So he was really, really intrigued to find out what it is. So he goes to take a closer look, and what he finds just absolutely shook him to his very core. The fake blood that he thought he'd seen wasn't fake. The straw hair he thought he'd seen was actually light blonde and caked in dirt and blood. The scarecrow that he thought he'd seen was taking short, shallow breaths. And as he takes in the scene and the shock of what he sees begins to fade, he realizes, tied with his arms behind his back to the post in front of him, was a young man clinging desperately to life. So we're going to journey back to December 1st, 1976. Matthew Shepard was born in Casper, Wyoming, to Judy and Dennis Shepard, and he's the oldest of two boys. His brother Logan was born in 1981, and despite the age difference between the pair, they were very close. They had a very close relationship, and there's home footage that I watched of the pair, and they're just so loving. They're so cute together, and you can tell that they're just really, really close. His father describes Matthew as being an optimistic and accepting young man who had a special gift of relating to almost everyone. He was the type of person who was very approachable and always looked to new challenges. He had a great passion for equality and always stood up for acceptance of people's differences. And his mum said when he was little, he used to dress up as Dolly Parton all the time.
Oh,
She said mostly for Halloween, he would dress up as Dolly Parton, but just for any excuse, always donned a Dolly Parton outfit, and he would put
why
on
not?
performances. Why not?
Why
You
not?
know. And he would put on performances. He was just the super cute boy, and he used to write little notes to his neighbours and post them in their letterbox. So
Oh,
he's just a really loving little boy. His mum said in an interview that she knew from a young age that he was gay, but it actually took Matthew quite a long time to come out, because in 1998 it wasn't as spoken about as it is today. So it took him a very long time to come out. I think when he was sort of in his 18, 19 when he came out, and when he did, his family were as they should have been, and they were very supporting,
Good.
very loving. They didn't sort of change how they were towards him. And since then, he had been very open about being gay, and he'd been a big part of the LGBT community in his college. And I know I'm missing out a lot of letters, but it was in that 1990s, it was LGBT. So it was a big part of his community in college, and he was very well liked. He was just a well-rounded, nice guy, but he was biddy. He was really, really small. So he was teased a little bit in school for being small. He didn't like sports. He didn't play sports. He wasn't very good at them. But he loved politics. So his dad said he stood up for equality, and he developed this love of politics, and he went on to study politics at the University of Wyoming. In 1995, when Matthew was 19, as part of his studies in high school, he traveled to Morocco on a trip with a group of his school friends. It was like some cultural thing that they would get to explore these different countries and explore the culture there and things like that. They were all having a really great time, as you can imagine. It was like 4 lads in Morocco, and they were all having a laugh until one night at around 2:00 in the morning. Matthew's friend said he came banging like a crazy thing, just knocking on their door, screaming and crying. And he managed to explain that he'd been walking back to his hotel room when he was pulled into an alley by 6 local Moroccan men, where he was robbed, beaten, and raped by all 6 men.
Jesus.
So as you can imagine, this just destroyed him. It completely changed him, and he wasn't himself after that. He was withdrawn, he was depressed, he was suicidal. He became very introverted, and his mum said in an interview that he even adopted the posture of a victim, and he was kind of hunched over and withdrawn. And he was even hospitalized a few times due to his severe depression. So he'd been having a really tough time getting over this attack, as you can well imagine. It's kind of took him a few years to get himself back on track. But by 1998, Matthew was 21 years old. He was getting his life back to where he wanted it to be. His mental health was more stable than it was, and he was starting to feel more himself. He was able to leave the house without having these panic attacks. So he'd be going out more and socializing with his friends. And he'd just met up with some friends to plan an LGBT awareness week on his campus. And he'd asked a few of them if they wanted to come back to the bar for a drink afterwards, but nobody did. They all kind of said that, no, we're busy, it's getting a bit late. So he went to the local bar in town called the Fireside Lounge, where he met 2 young men, Aaron McKinney and Russell Henderson, both the same age as Matthew, both 21. Aaron was a high school dropout. He had multiple arrests, actually. He was a bad guy. He had previous arrests for robbery. He was actually, when this was happening, he was actually waiting for a trial for a recent robbery that he'd done of a KFC. And he'd spent time in a juvenile detention centre. He was a bad guy.
Bad boy.
Russell Henderson, on the other hand, used to be an honour student until he fell into the wrong crowd. He had just a few minor convictions for drink driving offences and things like that. Nothing major, no robberies or anything. His parents described him as being a follower, so he would just go along with the crowd. And unfortunately, that crowd included Aaron McKinney. So Aaron McKinney and Russell Henderson had been at the Fireside Bar looking for someone that they could sell a gun to as they needed money. The bartender had actually said that they bought a pitcher of beer with dimes and nickels. They're just kind of scraping together whatever money they had. They both had jobs. They were both roofers, but it's kind of like few and far between. They didn't really, just sort of went to work as and when they felt like it. In an interview, Aaron actually said that Matthew had been sitting alone at the bar, and he looked smart, well kept. He was fashionably dressed, and he said he knew instantly that Matthew was gay, although he doesn't use that terminology. He was very derogatory about what he called Matthew, and he was sort of said to everybody that he was homophobic. He was quite proud of the fact that he was homophobic, so he wasn't very respectful at all. He was proud that he was homophobic, so he was also a racist as well.
Perfect. Yeah,
as if that wasn't bad enough.
He said that lovely.
He said that they targeted Matthew because they knew that he would be an easy target to rob, because he was a very small guy. As I mentioned, he was 5'2", something like that, and he weighed about 101 pounds, which in America they do everything by pounds, but we don't. We do it by stone, don't we? So I looked it up, and it's just over 7 stone. Which
that's tiny. Yeah,
my 11-year-old weighs more than that. So he was teeny. He's such a small guy, bless him. So they spotted him, and they just knew he was going to be an easy target to rob. So Aaron and Russell went into the men's toilets, and they devised a plan on how to get Matthew's trust so that they could rob him. And they decided to pretend to be gay. So they approached Matthew at the bar, and Russell describes that they kind of adopted this more feminine voice, and they made the voice higher to try and convince Matthew that they were gay.
It's disgusting.
I know. It gets worse.
Good.
The bartender said that the three of them chatted for a while, and Matthew bought a round of beers for everybody, and the bartender kind of said, I don't know why they were chatting. They'd never been seen together before. He knew that they wasn't friends, and they certainly didn't look like they would be in the same sort of friend circle. But they'd been chatting for a while, and once they'd all finished their beers, the three of them got up and left. It was around 12 o'clock at night. It was decided that Aaron and Russell would drive Matthew home because it was getting late and Matthew had had a lot to drink. So it was decided that they would drive him home. And as they got closer to Matthew's house, Aaron pulled a gun out and he pointed it at Matthew, and he said, "We're not really gay." He used a different word, but he said, "We're not really gay. You've just been jacked." And he hits him with the butt of the gun. And then in an interview, Aaron says that was enough to get Matthew to hand his wallet over. Matthew was obviously desperate to do anything. He was like, just take my wallet. It's absolutely fine. But there was something like $20 in his wallet. There wasn't, there just wasn't a lot in there. But robbery wasn't the only thing that they had planned for Matthew. He was just such a nice, caring, trusting guy. So he had no reason to suspect what they was going to do to him. But once he'd hit him with the gun and taken his wallet, they drove him out of town, and Russell was driving, and Aaron said to Russell, take this. They instructed him to take this dirt track, which led to a secluded or past like a secluded prairie, which when I Googled what a prairie was, because we don't call it that over here.
We don't have prairies.
We don't have prairies. It's just a field, like a vast expanse of field, which is where this post was the outskirts of this field.
Right.
It was quiet, it was desolate, and it was hundreds of yards away from the nearest house. Aaron then drags Matthew out of the truck, and in an interview with the police, they said that they actually found some of the truck carpet at the crime scene where Matthew had desperately been sort of clinging on to anything that he could, because he knew he didn't want to be getting out of that truck with those.
Yeah, he knew what was about to
he
happen.
knew that he didn't want to be getting out of that, because not only did Aaron hit him with the butt of the gun in the car, he hit him about 6 times during that car ride, with this gun, with the gun and his fists, he said. So once Aaron had got him out of the car, he began to savagely beat him while Russell held him. He hit Matthew with the butt of the gun over and over, just concentrating the attack to his face and his chest. And Matthew, obviously, he was pleading with them to stop, and he was saying, you know, I've got more money. You've already taken my wallet, but I've got more money. But that they wasn't interested in his money. Russell then tied Matthew's hands behind his back to that post. There'd been some sort of white wire in the car or in the truck that he'd gotten out, and he tied Matthew's hands behind his back and then to the post that ran out on the outskirts of this prairie. And once he was tied there, Aaron began again hitting him with the gun. In an interview that I watched, Aaron says that he could see what was happening, but he couldn't stop it. He said that he was kind of out of his body and he was watching what was going on. And the interviewer says, because Aaron says, I just couldn't stop hitting him. And the interviewer says, even when Matthew was begging you to stop. And Aaron said, by that time, he wasn't really saying anything at all.
Oh, God.
Which is just awful. Once they were done with Matthew, they took his shoes, they took his ID card from his wallet, and they left him tied to that post in the freezing October weather, barely conscious, like just barely. He was still alive, but he was just clinging on to life. And he stayed there for 18 hours before he was found. So once Aaron Kreifel, the mountain biker that had found Matthew, once he called the police, policewoman Reggie Flutie was the first to attend the scene. And she said it was just heartbreaking. She thought Matthew was a child because he was so small. She thought he was a small child. And there was trails of blood all over the area. It was sort of spread across like 50 feet where he'd been sort of trying to run away. There were drag marks where they dragged him back. It was just carnage. There was just blood all over the place, and it's completely covering Matthew. And this is awful. But she said that you couldn't see his face through the blood, except for 2 lines on his face where tears had cleaned away some of the blood.
That's so awful.
Oh, I just can't. It's so sad. It's so sad. It doesn't even stop there. I mean, I just can't fathom it. But she was an absolute hero, this woman. And if in that situation you'd want her there, she was just an absolute hero. But she said that his breathing was few and far between, but he was still alive. So she wanted to do absolutely everything she could to keep him alive until help arrived. And she knew that Matthew needed more specialised help. So she'd called for backup immediately. As soon as she saw the sort of scene and saw him, she called for that specialised help. But she wanted to make sure that he stayed alive until they arrived. So she began clearing his airways of blood. And he'd been there for 18 hours in the freezing temperatures. So the blood had clotted and it was congealed, and she said something just kicked in, just this natural reaction to save this boy's life. So she reaching into his mouth and dragging out all of this clotted blood, and she just kept saying to him, baby boy, I'm here, kiddo, you're gonna be okay, hang in there, don't give up, come on, you can do this. And like I say, she thought he was a young boy, and she said all the time that was happening, she knew that he'd been there for a while. The truth, like 18 hours, didn't come out until a little while later, but she knew that he'd been there. But she said in the distance, in the field, there was a small doe just standing and watching. And she said she knew instantly that this doe hadn't left his side and that it had been there with him while while he'd been tied to this post, so she knew he
Yeah.
wasn't alone.
Oh, that's so sad.
So when help arrived and Matthew was transported to the hospital, doctors said that he had 4 skull fractures, and they estimated that he'd been hit in the head with this gun between 19 and 21 times. I mean, there's no coming back from that, is there? You can't say that
No.
your goal was robbery, because he handed his wallet over on one hit. There's no need to carry that on 21 times. And you can't say that you didn't intend to seriously harm or to kill this person if you're hitting them that amount of times.
No, it wasn't like a panic thing where they thought, you know, we're gonna get in trouble for this or whatever, you know, we need to, or, you know, like panic and smacked him with a gun or something like that. For that kind of level of just pure evil.
I hadn't included this in the story, but I'll tell you. They said that Aaron said that at one point they were worried that he was going to tell on them. So he'd parked the car. He was worried that Matthew would be able to read the number plate, and that was what would trace them back to them. So if he told, he would be able to recount the number plate. So he says to Matthew, while he's beating him, while he's tied to this post, read my number plate. Can you read my number plate? So Matthew does, and he's like compliant. He reads the number plate, and that wasn't what they wanted to hear. So he just carried on hitting him.
That sealed his fate, didn't it?
That did. It really did.
Doing what they said.
Yeah.
But it then sort of just sealed his doom, didn't it?
It really did. So he had multiple lacerations and welts and bruising, and he was also suffering from hypothermia because he'd been out in that cold for that long. But the most disturbing of all of his injuries was to the left side of Matthew's head. He'd been hit with such force that it had torn his ear almost off.
God.
And it had caved in the side of his skull and had crushed his brainstem, and it was irreparable. So if it wasn't for that,
I mean, state the obvious, that is excessive violence. That's like pure hatred, isn't it? To be able to do that kind of damage to anyone or anything. There's multiple things going wrong with these two guys.
Yeah.
I mean, that, you know, like I said, that's stating the obvious, but geez.
Yeah. He'd been savagely beaten. Just no need for it. And the doctors actually said that the only other time he'd seen injuries as catastrophic as Matthew's was in a high-speed collision.
Yeah.
Where these crush injuries had taken place. That's how savagely this poor boy had been beaten. So Matthew's parents were, of course, informed, but they were living in Saudi Arabia at the time. So they were many, many miles away. And they took the first flight out that they could, but it still took them around 50 hours or so to be able to actually get to Matthew. His dad said when he received the phone call, it was something like around 5 a.m. and they just thought it was Matthew calling them. He called them every morning and he always called them early. So he thought that it was Matthew calling them. The police informed them that Matthew had been found gravely harmed, but they had no idea of the true extent of it. They thought Matthew had just been in a car accident. So don't forget, when the police found Matthew, he was just tied to this post. They had no idea that he'd been beaten by these two people. They didn't know what had happened. So they just informed the parents that he'd been found gravely harmed.
Yeah.
So when they finally reached Matthew, his mum said, this is a direct quote, and this is, when I was typing it up, it broke my heart. It's really, really horrible. Okay. So his mum said,
get myself ready.
It was the dental brace. That's how I knew it was my son in the hospital bed. Bandages and stitches all over his face, and bandages around his head where the final blow had crushed his brainstem. His fingers and toes were curled in a comatose position already, tubes everywhere, enabling his body to stay alive. His face was swollen, actually kind of unrecognizable till you got closer. One of his eyes was partially open, so you could see his blue eyes and the tubes in his mouth. You could see his braces. So, of course, it's Matt. Just can't imagine walking into, I mean, you would always in that situation pray that they'd got the wrong person, as horrible as that sounds.
No, I mean,
but the fact that they said
words.
They knew it was Matt from his blue eye and the braces that he was wearing. He wore braces from when he was little until he died. So they were told that Matthew wouldn't survive from the very start because of this crush to his brainstem, because the brainstem obviously controls pretty much every aspect of your body. So they told the parents that Matthew wouldn't survive, and if he did, it would be in a completely vegetative state, and it would just be his body surviving and nothing else. So Matthew never regained consciousness, and he died in hospital 5 days later on October the 12th. He was surrounded by all of his family. On that same evening of October 6th, after Aaron and Russell had beaten Matthew to within an inch of his life and left him to die, they had travelled back into town and had gotten into an altercation with these two other men. So these two other men had said that they just literally picked a fight with them. So as if it wasn't enough that they'd beaten Matthew so severely that they'd caved in his skull, they then travelled back into town and then got into another fight. But police were called to attend this scene. And when they arrived, they searched the men's truck and they found Matthew's ID card, and they found the gun that was caked in blood, and they also found Matthew's shoes. But obviously they didn't know that they were Matthew's shoes. The detective knew that they didn't belong to that pair because they were so absolute ruffians. So at this point, Matthew hadn't been found, so they didn't know what they were dealing with. They didn't know that they'd just committed this horrendous crime. They'd just been called to this altercation. But because of this altercation, Aaron had actually suffered, he sustained some sort of like hairline fracture to his skull during the fight, and he was taken to hospital to get stitches. The very same hospital where Matthew was taken 18 hours later, and they would end up 4 doors away from each other. Russell didn't sustain any injuries from the fight, so he was let go. He then went home where both his and Aaron's girlfriend were staying. Russell's girlfriend said that he was visibly upset, and he'd said that him and Aaron had done something terrible. When Aaron was eventually released from hospital and he spoke to his girlfriend, he had a very different attitude towards the situation. And he said to his girlfriend, "I'm pretty sure we killed a gay." Again, he doesn't use that word.
I was going to say, I can't imagine that he would just say.
He just strolls in, and, Russell had already mentioned what had happened, and the girlfriend sort of saying to him, what happened, and he's like, pretty sure I killed him. Just not bothered at all. But instead of doing what any normal person would do, these girlfriends, they just devised an alibi. They supported the Aaron and Russell, and they came up with this alibi. Both the girlfriends said that the men had been at home with them. Aaron's girlfriend would later tell people that she lied and that she was trying to protect Aaron because Aaron was just trying to teach Matthew a lesson.
I wonder what the lesson was.
I will tell you what the lesson was. She said that he needed to be taught that you can't hit on straight people. So she just had this attitude that he got what he deserved.
I'm feeling a lot of rage right
I
now.
could tell by your face that I could tell by your face when I had to take frequent breaks actually from doing this because it gets worse as well.
Oh God. Well, yeah, I mean, I said to Claire yesterday, I said, Sarah's story is, oh, it must be a really, really bad one, because messaged you and you'd said, like, I'm really struggling with
I
this.
was
really
I'm not
emotional, and that, you know, and as soon as I heard the word I'm really like the words I'm really emotional, I thought, this is going to be a bad one then, if it's making you super emotional. And
yeah, I'm a crier. I'm not an angry person. I don't get angry. I don't my natural emotion is sadness, but this made me so angry when I was writing it and researching it. It also made me very sad.
I embrace my rage. I am a bit of a crier. I don't think I always have been, but I think I'm quite good at holding that side back unless it builds up and builds up. But yeah, this is my two main emotions at the moment are extreme anger, and yeah, I feel really emotional.
Yeah, this is a hard one, and I thought I was, going to struggle to get through it, but I'll do my best. So it didn't take long for police to identify that Aaron and Russell had been involved. Once they'd found Matthew, and they'd already arrested, or they'd already been to and searched Aaron's truck where they'd found the bloody gun. They'd found Matthew's ID. They'd found his shoes, found the bloody gun. So they knew that Aaron and Russell had been involved. So they were both arrested. Once they were arrested, Aaron talked quite openly about what he'd done. He wasn't remorseful at all. He wasn't sorry. He took full responsibility for it, and he said, I hit him this many times. Russell actually didn't hit him at all. Russell just tied him up. I did it all. So he wasn't trying to pass blame or anything. He was like, yeah, no, I done it. So when 5 days later, when Matthew had died, they were charged with murder. So at first they were just arrested and charged with, assault and things like that.
There should be something higher than murder. I know there's like other charges that you can get associated with that, like I don't know.
You have like first degree murder and
first degree. Yeah, but I think there should be something that's, because this isn't just murder, is it? It's so much worse than that. I don't even have the words in my limited vocabulary.
So my next line,
explain what it is.
My next line says that the trial that took place gained immense media attention and brought Matt's story to the forefront of the fight against bigotry and hate crime legislation. So the media coverage was to get tougher sentencing for hate crimes.
Yeah.
Because it's so violent in this especially, and there's nothing really protecting people against these hate crimes. And people were in the town, gay people were scared to walk down the street now. A lot of people moved out of the town and things because of this, because there's nothing protecting these people. So almost immediately Matthew's murder was publicized as a hate crime because of his sexuality. Matthew's friends and family knew that police would try and cover it and say that it was just a robbery gone wrong. So they immediately began to inform the local papers of what had happened. And before long, it gained national media coverage. Like, it was everywhere. At his funeral, hundreds and hundreds of people attended. And they actually had to open another church to accommodate. And among Matthew's friends and family, there were a lot of gay rights activists that turned up to support his cause and support Matthew's family. But also, as I'm sure you can imagine, there was many people that turned up that weren't so supportive. Homophobic
rage again.
homophobic people from all over showed up. Amongst them was the Westboro Baptist Church.
I know who they are.
Of course, you know who they are. Now, if you Google the Westboro Baptist Church, one of the first websites that comes up, and I shit you not, I will spell it out for you, but it says www.godhatesfags.com. How is that even allowed on the internet? That's a website
I mean,
on
we're trying to
Google.
be careful about saying the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to have a rant. Okay. So this is where it starts. And if I will use bad language and I'll bleep it out. If you haven't got anything nice to say, don't fucking say it. Don't say anything. Nothing good comes of people going on the internet, going on television, going to gay bars when they're quite clearly homophobic, racist.
That was very loud.
Sorry.
It's okay.
I can limit the volume.
Yeah.
I can't in real life, but
no. I just for what purpose do they need to do that? What, it just doesn't affect their life. What does it matter?
But a lot of them say that they're doing God's work.
Yeah. But how can they use God?
It's nothing to do with you. It's got all to do with you, who I am, who I'm with, who I like, who I don't like. Westboro Church.
They have a very different opinion than you do.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Tell me about it.
They think that they have a right to say what people could do and who they can be with, and they are just for those that don't know of the Westboro Baptist Church, they're just a terrible group of human beings. They stand for hate against gay people, transgender people, Jewish people, Muslims, anybody that is not them, they hate.
Anyone who's not white as well.
Anyone, yeah. Anybody that is not the same as them. How can it even be called a church? Baffles me. So they all showed up to protest Matthew's funeral with the most awful things written on their signs and banners and things, and they have a famous sign, which if you Google them, you'll be able to see what the sign says. And the sign says the same as their website, but they also had signs saying, Matt in hell and all these other things. There's even a picture of a small child holding a sign that just says the most awful things. I don't even want to repeat it because it's that awful. Now, hate isn't something that is hate is a learned behavior. They learn that off of people. This small child would not have anything against gay people unless someone says to them what they are doing are wrong.
This is evil. You need to understand that if someone is gay, they're evil, they're going to burn in hell.
So it's just
that child's going to think,
oh God,
I'm going to do the right thing then. I'm going to have one of these signs. And
the child's got,
they're just repeating what they've been told.
Yeah,
same
you can't
as any child with their upbringing. That's what they're brought up with. That's what they're taught.
Yeah, it's just awful that this child has been so brainwashed and that he's going to grow up with these ideologies that this is, wrong and things. And like I say, when I was researching this, it was making me so angry, and I couldn't, it's going to get worse as well, actually. So meanwhile, the protests and things were going on. The Westboro Baptist Church was there protesting. Aaron McKinney is in court, where his defense attorney would go down the route of trying to use the gay panic defense. If you didn't hear me correctly, I'll say it again. The gay panic defense. And that's a real thing. and it still exists today, and it can still be used today in a court of law in America. I'm not kidding. It's outlawed a lot in certain states, but in some states it's still out there to be used. Now, many years ago, it would get people off. I'll read you the description of what the gay panic defense is, but
it's giving me the rage again. I feel like this story is like that with my emotions.
Yeah,
because I just feel like it is. It just as it starts to subside.
So I'll tell you now that the judge didn't allow this defense.
Oh, good.
So
okay, well,
they didn't allow this defense because Aaron and Russell had been pretended to be gay to gain Matthew's trust.
Yeah,
they won't allow this. They lured him in. So I will tell you what the gay panic defense is. The gay panic defense, or homosexual advance defense, is a legal strategy in which a defendant claims to have acted in a state of violent temporary insanity, committing assault or murder because of unwanted same-sex sexual advances normally between men. A defendant may allege to have found the same-sex sexual advances so offensive or frightening that they were provoked into reacting, and they were acting in self-defense. So they had diminished capacity, or temporary insanity. So that excuses their behaviour. Aaron's defence attorney actually says to him, tell the police interviewers that Matthew tried to come onto you and that you panicked. It offended you so much, it enraged you so much that is why you committed this crime, and that is why Aaron says that he kind of come out of his body. He saw what was going on, but he couldn't stop it. That is an absolute load of shit. That is not what happened, but that's what his attorney, his defense lawyer, said to him so that they could try and use this defense.
Well, that's fine, but let it go both ways, because the Westboro Baptist Church makes me so enraged and so offended. Then maybe I can be excused for how I react when I come face to face with them wafting their ridiculous signs in my face.
It doesn't work.
No, it's like a ridiculous crime of passion. It's like, what do people think we are? Do they think we're like vampires or something? That, oh yeah, I can see some prey.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? When you this is why people are so
dust into their face and lure them off into the darkness.
This is why people are so worried about coming out, because if you've got a group of, especially being a lesbian or something, and you've got a group of girlfriends and you come out, people then think, oh, you
fancy me.
Who the fuck do you think you are? How vain could you possibly be?
I know. Just because we're gay, it doesn't make us predatory. No. It doesn't make us fancy every single girl on the face of this earth. And in actual fact, for everyone's reference, I'm very choosy.
I'm very, very picky. How narcissistic can people be to think that just because
wonder if she fancied me?
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Well, actually, no.
Well, we could go on about this all day, because it's just.
I will.
And we will. This is a separate podcast regarding this. But that's the reason I wanted to choose this case, because it's actually, Josie said to me, will you do a case my girlfriend Josie, will you do this case about the gay panic defense, because we feel like people need to be aware of it, because we listened to a podcast years ago. Josie listened to it first, and we listened to it years ago, and she was dumbfounded about how this, because it's not over here, we didn't know. It's more prevalent in like America and things. We didn't know about it. So when she heard about it, she told me, and I listened to this podcast. It just blew my mind how that is even a thing. But like I say, it wasn't allowed in the trial. The judge said, not having that nonsense in here. So they were both tried for his murder. They were both sentenced to 2 life sentences each
Good.
to be served concurrently without the chance of parole. So the death penalty was on the table for both of them, but Matthew's parents said they fought the death penalty. They didn't want the death penalty for these two because they wanted them to live with what they'd done. I haven't got it on here because it was just too sad, but
I would feel the same.
there was
Yeah.
an interview where Matthew's dad, he'd written a statement, and he goes on to say that for every birthday that you have, remember that Matthew didn't have one. You know, for every Christmas that you celebrate, remember that Matthew couldn't celebrate that. So they actually petitioned to not have the death penalty. So
Devil penalty would be good.
yeah. So they're both serving their 2 life sentences in prison. But the trial it just gained so much media attention and coverage, like the likes of Ellen DeGeneres. She spoke out about it, and I think because she was quite passionate, I think she'd not long come out as well at that sort of time, and they spoke out about the lack of laws protecting people from hate crimes.
Yeah.
And Russell as well, later on in life after his sentencing, Russell spoke out from prison about his part in Matthew's murder, and he says, and I don't know whether he was trying to say it as like comforting, or I don't know, but I'll read it to you and you make what you want of it. And it says, as tragic as it is, and as unfortunate as it is, and as hard as it is for Matthew's family and for my family, for all of us to go through, it opened all of us up to be better people and really think about who we are. Now, if it takes something like that for you to be able to become a better person and to think about who you are, then you deserve a very lengthy
Don't put
stay.
yourself in the same position as his
No.
family. That's not for you to say. That's not for him to say, you know, yeah, I think as unfortunate as it was, it's not unfortunate, it's evil, and you did it. You had a choice, you made your decision, and you carried out this heinous, horrendous torture and murder.
Yeah, it wasn't just a case of assault. That,
No.
like I say, 90, you hit someone 90. And the fact Russell, what was really good in this trial as well is that Russell didn't hit Matthew. He was there, he was a bystander, he tied his arms behind his back, but he got the exact same sentence as Aaron did. Which I think he needed. Aaron said actually in an interview that Russell was laughing at it, he was giggling, he found the whole thing comical, which I don't care how much of a follower you are, at some point something in you must go, no, I'm out. I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
The fact that he didn't.
Matthew was left to die for 18 hours before he was discovered. He could have gone back at any point.
Yeah.
He could have called the police anonymously. He's just a shit person. And he deserves to get exactly the same sentence.
Yeah. He also said as well, he said, I think about Matthew every single day of my life. I think about him and every single one of those days that I've had that he hasn't had, and his family hasn't had, and his friends haven't had. And I'm so ashamed I was even a part of this.
Good.
Well, yeah, that's the least of it, really. But
yeah, I mean, just all right. Well, if that's what you're living with, then live with it.
Yeah.
I would have worse for you. So if you've just got that, fine, then you're lucky.
There's no Aaron hadn't spoken out at all. So Aaron, there's nothing. Once Aaron goes to prison, there's nothing then about him. He doesn't give any interviews about it. He doesn't say anything about his part in it. He's not remorseful.
He's got no remorse whatsoever.
No,
so
it was just another thing.
I'm good with it.
Yeah, he tried to touch my leg, so he deserved what he got. That was his way of looking at it. And Matt, his mum had said that Matt, from a very young age, had wanted to be famous, but I don't think anyone could have predicted quite the way in which his life would shape the way that people now deal with hate crimes. So I'm going to end this on a short post that I found on the Matthew Shepard Foundation website. And it says, "The life and death of Matthew Shepard changed the way that we talk about and deal with hate in America. Since his death, Matt's legacy has challenged and inspired millions of individuals to erase hate in all its form. Although Matt's life was short, his story continues to have a great impact on young and old alike. His legacy lives on in thousands of people who actively fight to replace hate with understanding, compassion, and acceptance." And it's just such a shame that it takes something like that to happen for people to stand up and do something.
Yeah, it does. And like you said at the beginning of this story, it's still happening.
It's still happening.
Still going on. It's still happening. The Westboro Baptist Church are still preaching their shit.
The fact that the gay panic defense is still out there, that's what needs sorting out. That can't be a defense.
No,
you cannot
that's
be driven to temporary insanity by someone's sexual advances. If you want to find out some more on Matthew Shepard, go on the Matthew Shepard Foundation website. There's a film on it as well. There's a documentary called Matt Shepard Is My Friend, and that is so sad. They made a play on it as well. There's the Laramie Project. There's so much that came out because of this case. So go and do some research on it if you need to. There's a lot more to this story than what I've been able to tell. If you have enjoyed listening to our episodes, make sure you rate us and leave us a review on whatever platform you are listening.
We absolutely love hearing from you guys. So you can also help support our show by donating to our Buy Me a Coffee link. We will make sure that you get a massive shout out and a big thank you in our next week's episode.
You can also follow us on social media at Perplexed Podcasts. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and if you want to see more videos and blooper reels, subscribe to our TikTok and YouTube channels.
You can also email us your stories at perplexedpodcasts@gmail.com.
And you can find all the relevant links in the episode descriptions. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.